All right, so I'm going to blow this back up a little bit. All right, so we're going to get right into it. So, Dr. Caxton, the first question that, I've heard a lot of people bring this up, but I don't think it's ever really been thoroughly explained. But what is natural immunity? What is
Okay,
natural immunity? I've heard people talk about it, but can you provide some more context into that for the
sure,
audience?
sure. So, and in addition to me explaining this real quick, I'm going to tell you briefly why Fauci and his people hate natural immunity. So, natural immunity, particularly to viral infections, occurs uh, when you are exposed either directly or indirectly from somebody else getting sick. So, if there's a bunch of viruses in an area, for example, and you get exposed directly to the virus, you may or may not have symptoms of the infection itself, but because the virus is a foreign body, your natural immune mechanisms launch a response to fight that protein, which is the virus. And so the next time you come in contact with the virus, you find out that you are actually immune to infection. Now, remember, the first time you got exposed directly to the virus, you may have gotten sick, or you may not even get sick, meaning you got exposed, but the exposure amount was not enough to overwhelm your natural health to the point where you fell sick. If it did, and it was a lot of millions or billions of viruses, it may overwhelm you to the point where you got sick, started coughing, got a fever, etc. But then you might develop what's called immunity against reinfection. So, immunity then measures, natural immunity then measures your capacity to withhold and fight off a second or subsequent, third, fourth, fifth, whatever exposure to the same agent. If that happens, then it means you've developed natural immunity to the virus or the infection. So when we think of SARS-CoV-2, which is the focus tonight, you must remember that the US government officials involved, we might get to that later, in letting people know about natural immunity remain absolutely silent. And you'll see on one of the Rumble channel videos an illustration of several studies of over 10 million people in different parts of the world, including the US Army, um, showing that after COVID-19 infection, as far back as 1990, I mean, 2020, individuals who had been exposed to SARS-CoV-2 developed natural immunity. Now, remember this. Rand Paul was in the Senate, and there's another younger senator that was Jim, some I've forgotten his name, that they were battling with Fauci on the Senate floor, and he remained totally unshakable and mute about the presence and reality of natural immunity. So there is natural immunity to SARS-CoV-2, if that's the question that people have. And it is established not just by stories, but by data. One of those pieces of, I mean, there's multiple pieces of data. And I think, Terry, I think most people, because they got the vaccine, want to live in denial of natural immunity. There's something called shed and fraud. It's a term in Germany that describes the the joy that you have over somebody else's pain. It's a form of psychological derangement, and people enjoy that, particularly when it came to those who refused to get the vaccine. So there is natural immunity to SARS-CoV-2. And what's even more important, the US government officials that we trusted failed to let us know. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that thorough response, Dr. Caxton. And I must say, you look mighty dapper there,
Oh, thank you.
in your, your blazer and your yellow tie. So thank you for showing up and letting the people know that, hey, you like to make sure you're looking good while you're speaking good.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So let me move into the next. Oh, oh, okay. Oh, you guys couldn't hear me. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I gotta remember to work two mics on here. But yeah, I was just giving Dr. Caxton a compliment regarding, how he showed up looking good, speaking good, had his blazer on, nice tie. And so yeah, we're gonna continue the conversation. So my next question would be, Dr. Caxton, can you walk us through your journey of this medical censorship? How have you personally been censored regarding this COVID-19? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Sure. Absolutely. So in 2020, um, in March of 2020, around the time that the pandemic was uh, declared, actually prior to that, in January, the first week in January, I started, once we got information about the China deaths. I am an ER doctor also, even though I do hospital medicine and critical care, I also work in the ER. And in the first week in January, when we got information about the pandemic, or rather the China virus or the SARS-CoV-2 virus, I started researching for what could be responsible. And by March and through February, I'd done a lot of research on SARS-CoV-1, as well as the disorders through which viruses can kill, the what's called a cytopathic effect. In other words, some viruses will directly destroy a cell. That's called cytopathic. There's also another method called cytokines, right? We'll get to that later on, I think. But once I made that discovery, typically the CDC will provide doctors information so that if there's a new disease in town, even if we don't know the name of the disease, exactly how to treat it, the Center for Disease Control will tell us what they found under the microscope, what they found when they drew blood from the patients. And they will let us know those pieces of the puzzle. And with that, every properly trained doctor who was taking care of patients and is up to date on their knowledge base can put together a plan of action. Sometimes the CDC has nothing to offer us but to tell us this is what we found on the microscope and in the laboratory. But the CDC is a phenomenal place, or was. They will sometimes come up with not just the molecules that they found in the blood or what they found in autopsy. They'll also tell us that this is an action plan that they have tried and may work. But in the case of SARS-CoV-2, the CDC remained absolutely silent. And here I was in February of 2020, discovering that hydroxychloroquine was a useful drug for SARS-CoV-2 infection, even before Trump put it out. There's another doctor from, I think, Panama or, no, Panama or Thailand. I just remember him because of his features, who walked up to me, nice, chubby, good looking guy. He said, "Hey, Dr. Perry, I think I was the ear doctor in the hospital." And he said, "I think we need to find hydroxychloroquine." And so began this thing about hydroxychloroquine. Until today, Anytime hydroxychloroquine is mentioned, it's what? Shut down. As a matter of fact, even the doctors who are fighting for ivermectin today, saying it's useful, and some of them even taking the FDA to court, they don't ever mention hydroxychloroquine. You know why? Because of massive censorship. Mine started when I started talking about hydroxychloroquine. It went further because I have like Facebook blocked my information, threatened me, and in August of 2020, I had to write Facebook a letter saying everything I've written that you're trying to block has always been randomized control trials, papers published by medical journals. So if you're trying to prevent me from releasing information to people, it means you are the problem. Little did I know that they were the actual problem. This was August 2020. But let me come back down to April. On April 8th, my first book was published. You see, the book that you highlighted there, that's the second edition of this book. I released the book on April 8th. I was writing a book for doctors so the doctors can know exactly how to treat COVID 19. Yes, it's a big threat, but we knew what to do to treat this disease, this infection. We've been told by Didier Raoult as far back as end of January stroke February of 2020 exactly what to do for SARS-CoV-2, but they almost destroyed that man. So on April 8th, I released this book called COVID-19 Remedies on Amazon. And Amazon, believe it or not, blocked that book. On the site, there was a Chinese book on COVID. So pretty much my book was the first published book in the US on US soil by an author here that explained what people could do so they don't get sick. So Amazon, if we have some time, we'll come back to dive deeper into that. Amazon blocked that book, which could have, you know, not even sold hundreds of thousands, but at that time, no one had any other thing to share on COVID. So you can imagine the impact of that book. So I republished the book that you see that up there in June of 2021. And the reason for that is simple. I want to focus a little bit on Amazon. When I published this book, and I think I shared it with Danielle. So in June, the day I published it, I looked for the book. The book was released by Amazon. At that time, people had been asking me questions about the vaccines. So I deliberately took some time to explain how clinical trials work, what number needed to treat was, number needed to vaccinate, and those little things that people just needed to understand, including healthcare professionals. And could you believe this? The front page, the cover of my book, Amazon prevented the cover of that book from being available for exactly 1 good month. I couldn't see the cover. In fact, the first day they told me the book was released, I went, typed in my name, typed in the name of the book, and was looking for my book. And I scrolled past my book. And I was looking, then I went back. I said, but the book should have been up there. So my book was, they said it was ghosted. So if you were looking for a book to help you understand COVID-19, what you could do to prevent yourself from getting sick, which I think we'll get to later, you came to my book, you'll see a blank front page, cover page, and you're going to scroll past it because even I, the author, scrolled past my own book. That's on Amazon. Um, so not only that, but Facebook blocked my books. Now, if we go to 2021, around January, there was a video I did on YouTube saying 4 questions you should ask your doctor if they want to prescribe the mRNA vaccines for you. You should ask them 4 questions. And, you know, because YouTube is a phenomenal search engine, I guarantee you that around the world, there will be so many people wanting to know what 4 questions should I ask my doctor before I take the jab or accept to take the jab. Those were paramount questions. And I guarantee you that not one single doctor on the planet, except Anthony Fauci, will have an answer to those 4 questions. And guess what? That video, 3 years later, sometime around September of last year, somebody asked me the question about what they should be asking before getting the jab. And I said, I did a video on that 3 years ago. Why don't you go check it out on, I think it was January 14th, 2021. And I decided while the person was on stage with me to go look for the video. And you know that, again, let's emphasize this for some people. YouTube is a search engine. If you ask a question, if there's a corresponding video, it will pull it up. The question that person was asking, my video answers that question. When I went to look for the video, I don't even care whether so many people see it, as long as they have the information. Believe it or not, less than 8 people, maybe 8 people, had seen a video that tells you the 4 questions you should ask your doctor. That's impossible. That is the extreme tightness with which YouTube or will censor anything potentially able to educate people. And it's unfortunate that in the process of stifling and preventing information from getting out there. And of course, I got many people. Many times they will block me. Many times they will say this does not meet our community guidelines, and I tell them that, but your community is not my community. My community wants information. And all I got then was, sorry, we can't publish this. It does not meet our guidelines. So, yes, YouTube. And you know that about a week ago, unfortunately, the former CEO of YouTube, Susan Wojcicki, passed away. She passed away from lung cancer. And way before the pandemic, you know, people who will have breast cancer, lung cancer, they 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you know, with recurrence, and they survive. All right, they survive. But now you see people who have no history of cancer in their family just rapidly getting cancer and dying. But that's off track. So let me get back to Facebook. Facebook did the same thing. And after I wrote them that letter in August of 2020, I must say this. Prior to that, there was one video I did on the pandemic that reached about 200 and something thousand people within about 2 months. So I wasn't considered to be a potential threat to what they call misinformation. In other words, telling people what they needed to know until that time. So from that point onwards, I always got very few people seeing my videos. I mean, occasionally I get 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 200. But from that point, there was a clamp. And it's okay as long as people can get the information. And they prevented that from happening. So YouTube, Twitter. Twitter was interesting in that some videos that other people will post on YouTube that was informative. Sometimes I will just try to post those videos on Twitter, including some of my own videos. And Twitter will not allow me to post those videos. But I'm sure I'm not the only one here that might have experienced that kind of difficulty, certainly. But social media was a
Yeah, you're right
big,
about that,
big
Dr.
barrier
Caxton.
to learning what was the truth about the pandemic and what could be done. And I suffered, I think financially, what that book could have brought me. Um, the first book. The second book, the one you see behind you, which was an expansion of the first book, actually contains a lot of information on things you could get from over the counter. And we might get to that later on. But it was a horrible thing. But I've learned to take things in stride, knowing that I serve a God who created all of us, and He's going to bring justice at some point to everybody that has unclean hands when it comes to COVID-19. I hope that answers that question.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, you always provide a great, thorough explanations and breakdowns for everything. And I just want to, first again, just give a salute to you for just being a warrior for truth and standing in what you have discovered and standing for what's right. And speaking out when you see something that, it's not what they say it to be, as they say or have told people that it's safe and effective. So, the fact that you've experienced this censorship, I mean, a lot of us definitely can attest to that. Um, I always tell people every day, you can click on any one of my profiles, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You're probably going to get some type of warning message where they're going to ask you, are you sure you want to follow her? Because I'm definitely heavily censored. I kind of just stopped using Facebook because, it just, my videos wouldn't even move. And they were constantly flagging everything that I put up there.
Yes.
So it was just, I was just like, you just can't fight. You can't beat a beast when you're playing on their playground. So when you
Yeah.
go on these platforms that they own, you're on their playground. So, I'm
Yes.
going to continue to fight on their playground. But, at some point, when they're controlling the algorithms and they're putting their little, spin on things, then that's what they do. So, which is why I'm glad that we have Chatter now, something that's a different platform, hopefully that will not fall into that same algorithm of censorship. So, right now, we're going to get it out there. We're going to say what we want to say, and
Yes.
we're not going to be censored today in this interview. So, again, thanks so much for being here. Now, let me ask you, because you just talked about the censorship. Is there any fraud that you've witnessed that you wanted to tap into before I ask you about what mRNA is all about? Is there anything that you've witnessed as far as it relates to medical fraud? I mean, before you came in, I did play a few videos that talk about how they get, doctors get these incentives based off of how many vaccines you've given your patients and these different bonuses. But do you have anything that you could add to that conversation as a medical fraud? I mean, even a lie or not giving someone informed consent to me is medical fraud. But what would you classify as medical fraud regarding this COVID-19 pandemic that we've been
I th-
experiencing?
Thank you. On an administrative side, I have very little to do. I don't have a clinic. I work in hospitals, and my exposure. And if you noticed from the pre-interview, I told you that the things that I want to talk about are things that there will be not one single person on this planet that can dispute it with me. So partly that will require that it's either printed piece of paper that I read plus the exposure that I got. So here's one thing. We If we go through the channel of defining medical fraud, you intentionally deceive people in order to get a benefit, correct? It's pretty clear. Um, and you can point at fingers immediately. Personally, I was never in the hospital setting dealing with administration on the level of, oh, that patient died of COVID when they didn't die of COVID, right? I didn't. And we all know that that was incentivized. For some doctors, and whistleblowers came out. So I will say, if you want to know more about that and you're listening to me or watching me, go and look up whistleblowers on COVID. Type that in, Google it. You'll find enough information on that. But I want to narrow that focus to the people that we least expect. Before we go further, I know you're going to post some patents. One of the patents was US patent 111075888. Now, we do know that that patent was filed on November 30, 2020. It was filed 5 months after Anthony Fauci had told us that hydroxychloroquine was not useful in COVID 19. but he was part of a group that stood to benefit from a vaccine. So that is a form of fraud perpetuation, not just fraud as an event in a point in time, but as a continual, a perpetuated fraud continually, even before the Senate. Because when you file a patent and it has medical background information that shows hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, the antibiotic, and zinc in combination is treatment for COVID. And you have the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, who was paid to prevent pandemics, say that hydroxychloroquine does not work for COVID 19. He has never treated a single patient. When someone asked him a question, he says, I've been part of a team. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, if you were a doctor, you won't just want to be part of a team. You'd want to treat a COVID or two patients, I mean. So the great Fauci did not treat a single patient. And all he could say is, I was part of a team. You're no different from an intern. So for that, to mislead an entire nation of over 300 million people in order to benefit from the incoming mRNA vaccine from Moderna, that's fraud because you deceive intentionally because you want to benefit from your patented mRNA injections. That's one example. A second example, and you can see that these have global and far-reaching effects, not just somebody in a little hospital, writing COVID-19 on a death certificate because he's going to get an incentive. Pfizer, in their clinical trials, that's another example of medical fraud. They told us that 162 people in the placebo group got COVID, while 9 in the treated group, out of over 20,000 people in each group, over 20,000. So they were now telling us that 9 over 20 something thousand versus 162 over 21,000, that was the major difference. That was a very tiny difference, by the way. You see, 10 out of 100 million versus 10 out of 100 billion is no difference between those two in real life. So if you're going to say that because in this group 10 out of a million, 100 million had an exposure, and in that group 10 out of 100 billion had an infection, and it's 1,000 difference, that doesn't mean the drug is 1,000 times more effective, ladies and gentlemen. It just means you know how to tell your lie. And that's what was done with Pfizer's mRNA vaccines. And that was why, ladies and gentlemen, when the vaccine was now put to test in the real world, and it was discovered that those vaccines were not as effective as we've been told, then Pfizer says, oh no, we didn't say it was better at preventing infection. We didn't even say that it was better at preventing transmission. Those two imply fraud, right? We just said, and what we now know is that it reduces the severity of the infection. Ladies and gentlemen, the EUA approval or authorization was given for Pfizer's jabs based on the fact that, and I'm going real slowly intentionally, they received the emergency use authorization based on the clinical trials that they published saying their vaccine prevented infection 18 times better than placebo based on misuse of a denominator factor. That was fraud. Annually, fraud costs the US government about $60 billion. Just so we close out there. And I think that might suffice individually or personally. The only real problem I've had is when I'm working in the emergency room in some places and I want to discharge a patient home who have diagnosed with COVID 19, put on hydroxychloroquine, Zithromax, and zinc, or sometimes, surprisingly to you, you'll hear about that later on, Zyrtec and Pepcid sometimes is all some patients need to knock out this virus and its effects if they come in early enough. And we are not told about that. Again, intentionally deceiving the world about the usefulness of these drugs that I just mentioned is a form of fraud. And I'm going to yield the mic there.
Well, thank you for answering that question, Dr. Caxton. I mean, a few points there. The hydroxychloroquine, the fact that they lied about that, suppressed that, that could have really saved a lot of lives. But of course, from my research, they didn't want to save lives. They wanted people to take the injection. That was the point of it, to push the fear, the false evidence appearing real, so that people felt that they needed this jab.
Yes.
The fact that they told people, once you take it, and I have a clip of Biden saying it right out of his mouth, once you take these vaccines, you're not going to catch COVID. You're not going to have transmission. I mean, he said it multiple times. And I'm going to make sure I play this clip before this show ends today, because, you don't have to believe me, but you will hear it from his mouth. He said, once you take these injections, you will not catch COVID. You don't have to worry about transmission. But yet he had COVID, according to him, 3 or 4 times now. Then you had the CDC woman, she resigned. So they base all of this on a lie, which for me is a part of this medical
Fraud.
fraud. You told something, you didn't tell all the information, and you held out something very critical that could have
Yeah.
saved lives. But
Yes.
no, they wanted people to take the
The,
injection. So,
yes.
and that's why I have to have these conversations, and I will continue to have these conversations until accountability has been had for these lies. People worried about who's the next president, but we haven't held anyone accountable. That's the previous president and the president that we have right now. So, until accountability is had for the lies, from my mom believing she needed to inject herself, from my father who believed the lies on television, who injected himself, from my other family members who injected themselves based on a lie and not being given informed consent. I will continue to stand on my ground until these people are held accountable. Even if I have to be reincarnated and come back in my other life, somebody's going to be held accountable, because I will continue to be a warrior for truth as it relates to what they have done to humanity. So thank you for that question. And I just want to say for the audience, you will have an opportunity to ask your questions. So make sure you do have a few, your questions in mind. But I want to kind of go through an interview style first. So I have a few questions that Dr. Caxton is going to answer, and then we will open it up for the audience. So let me just go to this next question, and that is, because I know a lot of people, when I was telling people not to take these jabs, I said, their response were, well, what's wrong with this vaccine? It's just like the vaccine I got when I was a kid. What's the difference? It's this, we've always been getting vaccines. So can you answer the question? what is the truth about mRNA vaccines that people may not be understanding?
Thank you for that question. So, first of all, let's go over how and why vaccines for any reason whatsoever. Okay. Remember at the beginning, I mentioned how when you are exposed to a virus, you may develop natural immunity. Well, a vaccine is supposed to accelerate, or rather, rapidly reach far more people and give them immunity before they even get sick. Okay. So that means when you think of when the cowpox and smallpox vaccination started and we moved on to vaccinating the majority of people, it was a beneficial thing when it happened. So, for example, I will not wait for somebody to get a natural infection that has the possibility of killing them or disabling them if all I need to do was get a vaccine and inject them with the vaccine. The reaction from that vaccine, I'm going to go over, will be mild compared to the reaction that a person might get from the infection itself. And the infection may be even deadly or partly disabling, such that there's something called the risk and the benefit ratio. So if a vaccine is safe, for example, and it takes about 10 years or more to identify safety, because you can't just jab somebody right away and then say the vaccine is safe. There are so many drugs in the world that never pass through the FDA. You know why? Because while they are effective, they're not safe. So, thalidomide was given to women when they were having a lot of vomiting during pregnancy. And if you're not familiar with it, there's something called the thalidomide disaster, which is women who received the same drug, and it was phenomenal for preventing hyperemesis gravidarum, which was vomiting during pregnancy. When they gave birth to children, some of them had no hands, no forearms. They developed what's called phycomelia, deformities in their limbs. In other words, the hand that should start after your wrist is now at the shoulder. All kinds of abnormalities. That was the thalidomide disaster in the 70s and 60s, or even earlier too. So it was stopped. The mRNA vaccines, or so-called mRNA jabs, for some, have not been tested enough. And what do I mean by tested enough? At the time, within 2 or 3 weeks from the onset of the clinical trials, the head of the NIAID, Dr. Anthony Fauci, reported in the news that, oh, the clinical trials have started about 5 weeks or 4 weeks. Oh, the vaccines, and they asked him about the vaccines. That's when I first realized there was a problem with this guy and a problem with the vaccine. Actually, if you look back as 2019, and I mentioned the name of the gentleman in my book, Tamano, in 2019 wrote this article in a vet medicine paper demonstrating that coronavirus vaccination was toxic to the animals. So that was a very good paper. And prior to that, coronavirus vaccines have not been successful in inducing immunity and safely doing so. So when they injected these macaque monkeys, and both the ones that were exposed to COVID after vaccination and the ones that were exposed to COVID without getting vaccinated, all of them basically had different degrees but demonstrated COVID 19 and showed us that the vaccine was not going to be that effective in humans either. But the
Yeah,
mRNA
something's
vaccines,
going on. Let me see if I can get this back up. Give me a second.
sure.
Okay. Oh, no. Hold on a second, guys. Yeah, it's not coming back up. Give me one
Can
second.
you hear me?
Dr. Caxton, hold on a second. The stream
Sure.
dropped. Let me get you back in here.
Okay. I can hear you though. I can
Try
hear you very well.
reset. Okay. Can you guys see the screen?
I can see the screen. I can hear you too.
Yeah, somebody go down and come back up because I had to reset this chatter studio. So just want to make sure because if you reset, sometimes now you have to go down. Like I'm either gonna have to go out the room and come back to see it. So, but somebody tell me if you can see it once you go down and come back up. Can you guys see the screen? You can? Okay, you can? Okay, well, just let me know that you guys can hear. Go ahead, Dr. Caxton. Go ahead and finish with what your thoughts were. I'm sure you might have got thrown off there, but
Sure.
you were getting to the good part. Go ahead, finish,
So we're talking
continue
about the
breaking down what
mRNA
the
vaccines,
mRNA vaccine is all
and we
about,
talked about
please.
how typically when you test a vaccine, nobody in their right mind, 3 weeks, 4 weeks into a clinical trial for a vaccine, any well trained doctor, without any intention to deceive the world or himself or others, will come out 3, 4 weeks after a vaccine is being tested in clinical trials and say the vaccine is safe and the vaccine is effective. How? Just because when you think about Fauci saying the vaccine is effective 4 weeks into the clinical trials, means the vaccine was injected into people, some protein called an antibody was created, but 4 weeks is too early to tell how long the immunity is going to last. And when you see in the real world, some people have taken 5 jabs. Ask the same people, how many jabs of measles have they taken? How many jabs of polio have they taken? And that goes to those people who are trying to tell you, well, I got the jabs. I've already gotten measles, mumps, and all those other virus infections in the past. I got vaccinated. How is this different? It's different because it was not well tested. Number one, there were contaminants in the batches, whether this was intentional or not. It should not exist. Number three, when the adverse effects were being recorded, the VAERS at some point got overwhelmed. The government tried to lie about the adverse effects. That didn't work for those who are awake. So the mRNA vaccines are not just controversial, their safety is questionable. Their effectiveness is without any doubt no different from that of acupuncture, in my opinion. And the reason I use the word acupuncture, amongst other things, is there were studies of acupuncture showing a boost in immune system that lasts more than 30 days. Unfortunately, that study was done for migraine in women. It wasn't done for immunity or viral immunity. Had it been, the study was done to see how long acupuncture as a treatment strategy will boost immunity. You might not be surprised that it's about 3 months. That's around the amount of time that these vaccinations last. In some instances, the vaccination protective effect lasts only 2 weeks. But remember, we're talking of an effectiveness that lasts only 2 weeks. They're expensive. The US government gave out money, taxpayer dollars, for the mRNA vaccines. And it were being used to enrich Big Pharma. Big Pharma shouldn't get any money from it. The final part of this, which is where I want to land the plane, and I want everybody to focus on whether or not we're doctors or lawyers, engineers, is that the mRNA vaccines that are used to create these jabs, they, they are dependent on one protein. See, the virus has multiple proteins, but they chose one protein called the spike protein. And I want you to think the spike protein is like snake venom in its capacity to attack the body. So it doesn't matter whether you got the vaccine, the jab, or not. You got to open your eyes and stop playing the Democrat Republican drama, in my opinion, sign of immaturity and lack of critical thinking. For those who have the skills, please lend it to your friends and family. For those who refuse, then paint this picture for them. The spike protein is like snake venom, okay? Which means you are injecting something into a human being so that they can make the equivalent of deadly snake venom. What are the chances that they're going to survive? They're likely to get killed. Because if you get bitten by a poisonous snake, you're likely to be maimed or to die or to be hospitalized with severe illness. The poisonous snake. Now, the spike protein is the equivalent from the mRNA vaccines. It's the equivalent of poisonous snake venom. Now, let me break it down clearly so you know this. Whenever you get a jab, the goal of that jab is to generate in your body something, some protein called the spike protein. Spike protein now spreads to different parts of your body. Spike protein is inflammatory, okay? And it can cause inflammation in the brain. Autopsies have been done showing the spike protein proliferation in the brain, in the muscles of the heart, and in virtually every single organ in the body in different concentrations. But even more importantly, when you get that mRNA jab or vaccine, the spike proteins are also concentrated in the ovaries. There's something called the biodistribution study that was done in Japan in that same year, 2020. Even though Anthony Fauci, the CDC, NIH, they all lied to us, saying when you get the jab in your forearm, the lipid nanoparticle that holds the genetic code for the spike protein does not move from your arm, it stays there. Why did they lie to you? So when you get the mRNA vaccine or the jab, you are getting something that's based on a lie or half truths or untruths, misinformation or disinformation. And what's worse is that doctors have been threatened, attacked, silenced, including myself, okay, by medical boards. And I told them, don't ever come back and threaten me again. Because if you do, I will collect the names of 200 families that lost a breadwinner, and I will take pictures of all the negative things that have happened as a result of that person dying within days of getting the vaccine. And I will write a book and I will communicate. I will hold conferences, and these people will all come if you threaten me again, because there's a particular medical board that did that. And I said, I have no time to talk about your mRNA vaccines. I'm just interested in saving lives with my treatment strategies. So somebody on Clubhouse went to report me to one medical board to say I was saying it was wrong to give the vaccine to young children and pregnant women. So that's how far the mRNA vaccines have come in dividing homes, in causing medical catastrophes because of that single protein called spike protein. And ladies and gentlemen, whenever you get an mRNA vaccine, you're injecting yourself with something that's going to produce spike proteins. Spike proteins are inflammatory, and their inflammation can be potentially deadly. And the mRNA itself can cause damage to your body. The mRNA has a genetic code, and unlike what they told us, this mRNA can slip into your nucleus and alter your DNA. They try to tell us that's also a conspiracy, but we found out that it enters into the liver, and some liver cells that were exposed to the jab. People's personalities are changing. The mRNA vaccine, I'll leave you with this. It does one thing and one thing alone. It produces a deadly spike protein. Now, let's leave the vaccines alone. For those who are medical professionals, they don't want to talk about the vaccines. You are free as a healthcare professional to say spike protein is deadly. I'm going to say that again. As a healthcare professional, it is your right and your duty to tell yourself and convince yourself and whoever that spike protein is deadly. You may be intimidated and told not to say the mRNA vaccines are not safe and effective, but you can tell anyone on this planet that spike proteins can and are deadly. I hope that helps. It should not be
Well,
given to
yes,
pregnant
it
women.
sure does. Thank you so much for answering that. Thank you so much for answering that question, Dr. Caxton. I mean, and I just want to say this again, for those that have taken the jab, I still support you. I'm not about trying to attack anyone, trying to create any type of, separate, unvax, the vax, and all of these things that media tries to push to keep us divided. I have empathy for those that have taken it because you were not given informed consent, just as my parents took it and they were not giving informed consent. But what I do want to encourage people to do is once you know better, you do better. So please do not take any more of these jabs because they are not what they have, told people what they really are to be. And just as he pointed out, they said that, the injection stays in your arm. The data shows that it's going all through the body. It's going past the blood-brain barrier. It is not just staying in your arm, and it is attacking other parts of your body. So, if you weren't here earlier, I played some clips. It talks about the fertility, the infertility that it's creating, as well as the myocarditis, the increase in cancer. So, I just wanted to put that back out there. And Dr. Caston, can you move to the right a little bit just so we can see you? Yeah, because it's like something a little bit over, a little more. A tad more, just a little tad. Oh, yep, right there. Okay, that is perfect. Yes, because something was kind of blocking half of you a little bit.
I
So
think
now
it's
we can
your
see you in full screen there. But yes, thank you so much for answering that question, Dr. Caxton. So let's keep the conversation going. And I don't know how much time we have with you today, so I'll ask a few more questions. And
sure.
then maybe if you don't mind taking questions from the audience, maybe if I'll test it out to see if you can hear the questions. But if you can't, then we might end the stream and just have you come into chatter. But we'll figure that out once we get to that point. But let me ask you this next question, and that would be, what do people or what should people know about Dr. Fauci, the FDA, Big Pharma, and the CDC? What should people know about those organizations
All right. So
and that person? Because Fauci is not an organization, but a
my
person.
best
But what should
resource,
the people know about that?
my best resource for you on my online course. I took the online course off the internet in June after Biden declared there was no more pandemic last year. I took it off. I actually have a chart where I compared Anthony Fauci with Bill Gates side by side. It was a very interesting comparison between what Fauci did with AIDS and what Bill Gates has done, both of them together with COVID-19. It's a very, very interesting chart. It's a video in a series, and but the truth of it is, I want to refer to Robert F. Kennedy and uh, the other book that I sent you, which was a book. There are two books. One was the Bill Gates problem. Anyone who is interested in trying to understand Bill Gates as a person, his philanthropy, and how he has messed up and destroyed that word philanthropy almost. The kind of person he really is and what he does. I also have on my Rumble channel a three-part series. I'm not advertising that, but if you really want to know about Bill Gates and how he has paid different entities, it's amazing the number of people or the number of journalists that he has paid out so that they don't tell the world the truth. And journalism is only about the truth, not power and not money. It's about the truth. Bill Gates has destroyed journalism on an international scale. And that's not the only thing he's destroyed, in my opinion. So if you want to know about him, go and get that book. You can get it from your library, just a library card. The Bill Gates problem. And you might post that later on, Kerry. For Anthony Fauci, I would say get the book, The Real Anthony Fauci. Again, that's by Robert F. Kennedy. The first one is not by Robert Kennedy, but if you Google, go to Amazon or go to your local library and get an ebook, Barnes and Nobles, Nook, you'll see the Bill Gates problem. Okay? They're not what we think they are. As a matter of fact, up until January of 2020, I used to look at Bill Gates as, despite his problems, he was a phenomenal guy to some extent. Like we all are, we have our flaws. And you can have that kind of money and not crave for some power. But I need to share this particular aspect about Bill Gates. In January 2020, when I saw the trend with the number of infections and it began to spread, and the president of the US at the time, Donald Trump, said, let's close the borders. And Anthony Fauci said, no, let's not close the borders. See, that was exact opposite of what should happen. Anthony Fauci was paid to prevent pandemics. Donald Trump likes business. If you watch something like the movie Jaws, you'll notice a characteristic trait. The government officials want business to continue as usual while putting the scientists to task. And the scientists want to close down the city, the lake, the ocean side. But in the case of the pandemic, it was the other way around. The businessman wanted to close down. The scientist who should know better was the one fighting to keep it open so that there will be a critical mass of infected people, was my conclusion. And it turns out that's a very high index of suspicion for your president to say, let's close down the borders, and you as a scientist insisting that we should not, despite what he knew as an expert on SARS-CoV-1. But that's just the beginning. When you read the real Anthony Fauci, you'll understand. And there's a third book that I would recommend by Robert F. Kennedy. Second book by Robert F. Kennedy is The Wuhan Cover-Up. Read those two books, either the audiobook, and like I said, I know you can get those books at your local library free online. Just download them on Libby and listen to it if you're not afraid of the truth. So, with Bill Gates, I later discovered in my research that he had paid a research institute in London, Surrey, London. He had paid them money, and this institute is called the Pirbright, P-I-R-B-R-I-G-H-T. He had paid them a lot of money. He started by paying them small amounts of money, and then later on, a lot more money. And it seemed to have given them a payoff in November 2019. And I'll explain this money to you so you have an idea of who this guy is if you didn't know. I didn't know that before. In 2013, he paid the Pirbright Institute $187,000. In 2016, he paid the same Pirbright Institute $387,000. And in 2019, in November, by the way, when the virus had already started spreading, this is a guy that's never given the Pirbright Institute even $500,000 before. Guess what? He gave them $5.5 million. If you watch mafia movies enough, you'll understand that that looks like a payoff. Now, who's the Pirbright Institute? The Pirbright Institute is the institute that I know filed a patent for deadlier versions of the coronavirus in 2010 and 2014. Bill Gates paid that same research center over $6 million. Over $6 million, ladies and gentlemen. And the first patent that this Pirbright Institute filed in 2010 was 888, for those who are writing, 882-8407. 882-8407. And if they filed the second deadly version of the coronavirus. So they made two deadlier coronavirus versions, and they patented it, and it was approved. And the second patent was 9969777. Again, filed from London on US soil, patented and approved. That's the one we know. What about the ones we don't know? Bill Gates spent a lot of money on remdesivir with Ralph Barrick. And if you look at any of my Rumble channels, you'll see some of these 60-second videos that will tell you a lot about, far more than a 10, 20-minute video will tell you. particularly the 60-second videos. So I'm going to stop there for a second. Just people whet your appetites about what you can find out about these guys. They're not innocent. They're not what you think. They're not heroes like you might think. Thank you.
Well, thanks for responding to that. And just so you know, I do have those books posted at the top, as well as that patent that you mentioned. So I do encourage people to, read that information. They always say reading is fundamental. All the information is definitely there. And another thing that people say is, and I always say this is to follow the money. Whenever you follow the money, you'll find out what are these people investing in, who's supporting who, as it relates to some of the things that you pointed out with Bill Gates. And I just want to add to that conversation because, there is a report that I looked into, and it talks about that, Bill Gates donated 3.4 billion to the World Health Organization, 3 billion to Gavi, 870 million to Johns Hopkins, 280 million to the Imperial College, 243 million to the University of Oxford, 155 million to the CDC, 53 million to BBC Media Action, 40 million to Professor Chris Whitley for English Chief Medical Officer, 18 million to the NIH, 9 billion to the Guardian, and also he donated to the, of course, the Event 201, as well as some different organizations such as the NPR, ITVS, PBS NewsHour, the Guardian, and I mean, I can go on and on and on. So just to the point, which is to follow the money as it relates to, what these individuals are investing into. So thank you again for answering that question. I do have like I think two more questions. Actually, three more questions. So the next question would be, because you already kind of talked about the spike protein. I mean, it's deadly. I don't think we even need to know anything else except for it's deadly. So, but what is a cytokine storm? I've heard that mentioned before.
Okay.
Can you share what this cytokine storm is all about?
Sure. So cytokines are a group of small chemicals in the body. They are released after there's damage to tissue, when there's inflammation. And the way you look at it is they are supposed to help protect the body. They're supposed to boost your immune system, help attack any foreign material in your body, and enhance their killing. So if you get some bacteria into your body, cytokines will be released as long as your body's immune intact, immunologically intact. Your cells will send these chemicals to the site where there's a damage, and they will then attract other cells like the white blood cells, macrophages, etc. And those cells will also secrete chemicals. In other words, their goal is to destroy this foreign thing. But sometimes, rather than just destroy the thing that enters your body, they go wild and they start attacking the person, generating the response to the point where a person starts getting sick and sicker. Then the different systems in their body start getting attacked. There are different kinds of cytokines, and you have interleukin, you're talking about a cytokine. Tumor necrosis factor, that's another kind of cytokine. Interferon, that's another kind of cytokine. So these are chemicals that cause inflammation, irritation, and abrasion. You can see that way, that when they attack the cells in the body, they can create any kind of havoc. And they're responsible for autoimmune disorders, and they're responsible for the kinds of deaths that result from COVID-19. I'll give you a little brief illustration. So those cytokines, they affect the blood vessels and they can lead to leaking, they cause leakages inside the blood vessels. So as the blood vessels that are tightly knit before, you don't bleed into your own body, but the cytokines can cause the vessels to relax so much that you start leaking cells into the outer parts, the layers under your skin, the layers around the organs, the layers around the lungs. And when that happens, tissues that are held tightly before that will not allow water or cells to pass through suddenly begin to allow cells to pass through then. That, when that happens, it requires a lot of cytokine concentration in the body. When that happens and it begins to affect the lungs, the heart, we call it a cytokine storm, and it often leads to death. And it was first discovered when patients were being treated with a different kind of chemotherapy for cancer, and it required the use of the body's immune system to fight the cancer. It's called CAR T cell therapy. So it was during CAR T cell therapy that cytokine storm took place, and they figured ways to fight and protect the body from dying from a cytokine storm. Now, since you asked, doesn't it make sense that cytokine storm is what kills people during COVID deaths? So naturally, remember at the beginning I said CDC will tell us what is going on in the body, even if they don't have a name for the disease. So when people die of COVID, oftentimes it's because they died of a cytokine storm, like the one I just described. But there are cytokine blockers. As a matter of fact, hydroxychloroquine is an established mild cytokine blocker, which means if you give it to a patient who got infected with SARS-CoV-2 early, hydroxychloroquine is not a heavy duty cytokine blocker, it's a mild cytokine blocker. That's why it's used in rheumatoid arthritis, for example. So if you give it early, before the cytokine levels reach dangerously high levels, hydroxychloroquine can block the cells producing cytokine. If you don't allow too much cytokine in the body, then the body inflammation will come down and come back to normal reset. But what was done was to allow the body to reach cytokine storm levels in terms of the concentration of cytokines, and then start giving them hydroxychloroquine, which again is another kind of medical fraud. And clinical trials, believe me or not, were designed like that to make sure the patients could die from use of hydroxychloroquine. So the cytokine storm is how patients die during COVID, and you can prevent the cytokine storm using different things, but not once in the entire year 2020 would you hear any member of the CDC, the NIH, NIAID, DHHS, or the FDA use the word cytokine. Because when you tell a doctor cytokine who has been trying to figure out how to get to the bottom of this COVID-19 so we can really help our patients, a smart doctor will suddenly, it will click in and say, wow, all I need is a cytokine blocker. And as a matter of fact, the doctors that got the best results and outcomes from COVID-19 were doctors who understood that cytokine storms were what were killing patients. And in China, in different parts of the world, clinical trials were done to try to block cytokines, and they had varying success levels. They were high and significant. For example, in my own case, I didn't do clinical trials, but you remember we were told that 70-year-olds, 65 and above, 70 and above, their risk of dying is almost 800 times that of a young child. Not when they came to see Dr. Caxton, not when they come to see people who were using the hydroxychloroquine protocol. In fact, there's a coroner that so mastered the use of my protocols, he saved almost an entire city using hydroxychloroquine, zithromax, and zinc. Cytokine storms are how COVID-19 kills. And if you can prevent the cytokine storm by blocking cytokine production at the earliest stages of exposure to the virus, you've prevented at least one death and one hospitalization. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Dr. Claxton, breaking that down for us. I do have one last question, and then I'm going to open it up for the audience
Sure.
so that they have an opportunity to, ask you some questions.
Sure.
So the last question that I'm going to ask would be, um, how come doctors don't discuss? Because I want to kind of get the preventative segment here, but how come doctors don't discuss holistic health, like herbs and natural medicines? Can you speak to any of that, and can you share with the audience what can they do as for preventative medicine, or what should they do if they feel that they are having any virus symptoms? Can you share anything regarding the holistic health and the herbs and the natural medicines and things of that nature?
Sure. I want to try and read something here. The reason for, this is that book that you posted up there, COVID-19 Remedies, a Frontline Doctor's View. The reason for that is in April 8, 2020, when I first published the book, I mentioned a lot about vitamin D and salt. So I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to tell you sleeping well. Sleep boosts your immune system. Not getting enough sleep is attacking your immune system. In other words, if you don't sleep well, you've become a virus to yourself. Okay? So you need a lot of sleep. 6, 7, 8 hours. Figure out what works best for you. But I wanted to mention this thing about vitamin D because when I published that first book and Amazon blocked it, it was very painful that they blocked such a thing. And I'd asked them, "Did you read the book?" I was in fighting mode. I was in warrior mode. So let me read this to you. Low levels of vitamin D have been associated with lower performance during pulmonary function testing in children. That came from a journal in Allergy 2011. Vitamin D, this is the second statement from this book. Vitamin D has been shown to inhibit cytokine production. Now, there are two kinds of cytokines, but for your own sake, just see cytokines as dangerous. That is from a journal that was published in 2012. All right. And I'm going to point to another journal. In a British study of over 6,000 patients, all right, it's from the British Journal of Nutrition. They found that the levels of vitamin D correlated very well with your likelihood of developing the flu. Okay. So low vitamin D levels meant you were likely to get the flu. High vitamin D levels meant you were less likely to get the flu. You will think these studies were done after COVID, right? No. If you read this book, it's there. Remedy number 18, vitamin D. And this was published first in 2020. And Amazon blocked this book. The point there is, even if you don't know anything that you should do today, I guarantee you that if you've not been taking good care of yourself, you smoke, you party, you drink, you do all that stuff, and you slow down by half, you start taking vitamin D, all right? and you talk to your doctor and you get enough sleep, just vitamin D alone with insufficient levels, particularly if you're African American, you're highly melaninated, and you don't make enough vitamin D, get your vitamin D levels checked. They've been associated with so many functions in the human body, including mental illness when they are low. So not only do we not talk about vitamin D as doctors, even though those are from peer-reviewed journals, there are about 4 or 5 citations in that book. In January of 2023, the the truth about vitamin D then came out in a very big study. I'll send that to you later. But the point of that book, of that paper in January 2023, was to show that overwhelmingly vitamin D was far more important than a jab that only lasts 3 months or even less. But besides that, your question, why don't we talk about holistic things? We have to talk about holistic things if there is ample evidence, sufficient training methods that expose us to the need to direct our focus on prevention than on cure or treatments. But the Western medicine that we know is focused more on treatments, not prevention. And when you talk about holistic, you're talking about prevention. Let me give you a very clear illustration. My oldest son passed away from cancer. All the studies that were classically done show us that high sugar intake feeds the cancer cells. Okay? So it is a disservice to a cancer patient to be told they can eat anything that they want while getting chemo or anything. Unfortunately, you know, most people are told they should go ahead and eat whatever they want. Particularly, they don't know how long they're going to live, so they start getting chemo, doing surgery and radiation and all that stuff, and they're eating high loads of sugar, feeding the same cancer cells that the chemotherapy is trying to destroy. On the converse, I've actually heard cancer survivors say that when they fast before going for chemotherapy, they are stronger after chemo than if they're not fasting. In other words, even though they say the chemotherapy wears them down, when they're fasting, when they go for chemo, it doesn't wear them down. I've had anecdotal evidence from that. So the doctors don't even ask, except for maybe smoking. They don't ask you what you are doing that might have led to cancer. Maybe they feel that by probing, they're attacking you, and you already have a grave diagnosis, so they don't want to attack you. But it's part of what I consider to be I'm not a holistic doctor. I'm a board certified internist, trained in the traditional Western ways. So, but I also know that there's some things in circulation. For example, I mentioned vitamin D. Vitamin D has entered the mainstream of the Western doctors' tools or weapons for fighting illness, particularly viral infection. Hopefully, okay. But we are taught on how to make a diagnosis, on how to treat, far more than we are taught how disease begins and what to do to prevent it. I hope that answers that question.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Caxton. I mean, this is what, the information that we all need to hear. And I do encourage people to get that book. Um, I do have it posted at the top. I'm definitely going to order that book myself because we, we have to. I almost feel like we almost got to become our own doctors to a certain extent. We have to
Absolutely.
educate ourselves on what's important, what we should be putting in our body, what we shouldn't be putting in our body. Reading the labels of these food products a little bit more to understand, the differences between good food and things that are not good, all the way around from the food to the health care to, just getting out there and getting some real sun as well. Because I know as a person of color, we always think that, we have enough vitamin D, but half of the time we're not even in the sun. So, it's just so surprising that people always make that comment like, oh, well, I'm my melanin. I have so much melanin. I don't need any vitamin D. But when I work from home, so I literally have to tell myself to go outside to get some, natural sun. But if I just sit here and don't, and procrastinate and not get out there and get my sun, then I will be, not sufficient enough. My vitamin D levels would be low as well. So thank you for bringing that up. Um, so now I do want to open it up for some questions. I know Butternut had a question. I'm not for sure how many other people have questions. But Fireburst, I just want to check. Are you there, Fireburst? Um, Come off your mic if you are there, because that way I can test to see if anyone who has a question in the audience, if Dr. Caxton can actually hear you, or else then I will have him just come into chatter. So is there anybody that has a question? Come off mic and then ask your question, and we'll see if Dr. Caxton can hear you using this format. Go ahead, Butter.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear Dr. Caxton?
I think I can. Go ahead. Let's see.
I think I can. Go ahead. Let's see. Okay. So you spoke on the messenger RNA vaccines, the most common ones were the well, you already most common one. I'm fortunate. So what was the effect of the Johnson? I know that was a DNA, was it? And what were the that particular?
I didn't.
Let me see. It sounds like yeah, it kind of you kind of went in and out of there. But was your question? What does he have any comments about the Johnson and Johnson vaccine? Is that it? Okay, let me read the chat real quick. Let me go. Let me go up in here and let me see. Go down. See. Oh, okay. Does the Johnson and Johnson vaccine have the same issues as Pfizer or Moderna? So I guess that would be your question. Does the Johnson and Johnson have the same issues as the other vaccines?
Sure. You see, the problem is they all reconstitute. Some use DNA, some use RNA, right? But they all reconstitute into you producing spike proteins. As a matter of fact, the Johnson and Johnson was banned in a few places, a few countries before the Moderna was banned in children in Europe. So the Johnson and Johnson was banned in several places because the effects, I think to me the effects were just as rapid as the others, but Johnson and Johnson didn't have as much government infiltration. They just went ahead and produced the vaccine, unlike Moderna with all its tentacles in the NIAID. In my opinion, see both are both the Johnson and Johnson, the Moderna, and the Pfizer as sharing the same pathway, which is spike protein. And if you're producing spike protein, you're gonna hurt people because it's the equivalent of a toxic snake venom, no matter what anybody says. So Johnson and Johnson was banned before the Moderna was taken off the market in a number of places. I'm going to leave it at that. Yeah, it's not any better, in my opinion, than the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines. Thank
Thank you for that response, Dr. Caxton. Is there anyone else that have any questions? And if you do, feel free to come off mic or you could type it into the chat. So while I'm waiting for you guys to do that, um, Dr. Caxton, is there any projects that you want to share? We talked about a few of your books, but is there anything else that you want people to know about you that, as far as as it relates to COVID, relationships, or just telling people a little bit more about you and what you're planning on doing on
you.
Chatter as well, and regarding some of the rooms that and topics you're going to be talking about.
Sure. For some of the people, maybe they don't know, I do coach a few. I select every year, no more than five fairly successful individuals who are afraid to get married or remarried. And I do coach them through maybe about 2 years of coaching. That is one of my greatest pet peeves that I enjoy doing. So that's ongoing. It's been ongoing for years and years. Aside from that, I just bless the world with my gift of understanding relationships on Clubhouse, and I'm going to move that. I just created the room, the 3 hour relationship room in Charter, and I'll be announcing. And I think from what I get a sense of from Chatter, you've got to do a lot more heavy lifting to get people to come into one room. But if you do a room spontaneously, you may find a lot of people there spontaneously. So I'm going to try both ways for the 3 hour room, which is the right, ready, and relate well. So those three things look very simple, but they are the keys. They are the Rosetta of successful marriages. If you've ever been to any of my rooms, you'll understand why I say that. It's the secret weapon for learning how to choose a mate. And I teach about that all the time. How to build a marriage and how to relate well after you've chosen the right person. Because if you don't do those things, if you don't choose wisely, you're going to hurt. If you choose wisely, but you don't relate well to the person you've chosen, you're going to hurt each other and you're going to lose something special. The question is, if you lose something special, everything that's left is not special. Don't lose what's special. So we talk about how to relate well and have a core, some framework. Most people go into a relationship based on their feelings instead of going in with a framework. You see, when you have the right framework, I'll give you illustrations here. The first one I'll give you is 2 days ago, I told my wife, she was upset with me all of a sudden, but she's a sweet lady. Okay. I said, hey, marriage is not always sweet. Okay. She looked at me like, I'm going to slap you in the back of your head. But she's a sweetheart. She's not a violent woman. I say, you look like you want to slap me, right? I tease her. She gets back at me. She teases me. But because we know how to relate well with one another, we know how to respect each other's boundaries. And when we cross those boundaries, how to rebound and get out of the zone. And I'm going to teach you a lot of things that are very practical. I don't, in those rooms, we don't ghetto. We respect people who have been traumatized by a bad marriage or bad divorce, but it's a room of respect, of love, and we teach principles that can help you unlock what it means to find a good mate and get married and stay happily married in spite of the differences and challenges. So that's on that. But I have another project. I finished that last year. It's called Time Management Pyramid. And so that's a time pyramid that teaches you a lot about how to manage your time. I don't know of anybody on the planet that knows about how to manage time like I do. I'm not boasting. I'm a full time physician. I've written over 20 books, full time father, full time husband, traveling physician. And I'm here on stream or restream. Because somehow I find a way to get things done that matter. And I have another book, book number 21, that I just started writing 2 weeks ago. And I'm expecting that book to be out by Thanksgiving or January of next year. It's called Theodynamics. So watch out for that. A lot of things that are going on in the church that don't make sense. You're going to read that book and understand how you may be contributing to what doesn't make sense, and how you can improve your life without getting to be a religious slave, and know the true God and what He really wants from us without the abusive charlatans that often abuse people who love God and are looking for ways to serve Him. That's what that is about. Thank you.
Oh man, that sounds like that's going to be an awesome book, and I feel like, a lot of people have forgotten about God and during these conversations, because for me, we're definitely in a spiritual war. People like to think if you believe in the devil and you can believe in evil, then, I mean, how can you not believe in the creator? When you look around you and you see the trees, you see how we've been built and all the things that matter and have life to it.
Mhm.
That just doesn't happen with the Big Bang Theory. There is a most high, and I encourage people to find whatever religion that is, to take you to your higher power, for you to understand the wisdom within you, because God is within you. I encourage you to do that, because you need that armor to fight against the wickedness in this world. You need that spiritual connection so that you can understand your power, the power that you have within you, so that you can battle these demons and everything that's happening. Because I don't remember that scripture off the top of my head, but it talks about that they take crafty counsel, against us. So being able to fight in this war, you're definitely going to need the word and the spirit, to put on that armor, and become a warrior. So I just want to, thank you again for coming in here, Dr. Caxton. I mean, this has really been an awesome um, interview. And me, I could go on and on and on, because I mean, I could come up with another 20, 30 questions, but I feel like, this was a good test, a good way to open this conversation up on on Chatter. No one's really talking about this. So just build it up, and we'll bring it back again and continue this, because until all of these wicked fools are locked up and, tried for treason and lies and crimes against humanity. These conversations will need to keep happening and continue to happen until, accountability has been had. So I definitely want to thank you so much for being here. I have your Rumble channel posted, guys. So make sure you follow Dr. Caxton's Rumble channel. Check out a lot of his quick videos. I like how you did, little 60-second videos, just giving people enough so that they can, take it in without being so overwhelmed, and then, do the research and come back, because I do find a lot of times when I do my presentation, they can go 5 or 6 hours, but people don't have that type of they can't pay attention that long. So I'm either going to have to start chopping down some of my content and breaking it down in little bits and pieces so that
Yeah.
people are not overwhelmed. But we do have one more question.
Sure.
Actually, we have two more questions before we start to wind down. So I'm going to throw it over to Fireburst, and then I'm going to go back to Butternut. So yeah, guys. Again, I really want to thank Dr. Caxton for being here. Go ahead and ask your question. We'll see if he can hear you, and if not, then I will repeat it for him to hear your question. Go ahead, Fireburst.
And Dr. Caxton, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us this evening. As always, information is very clear and precise. My question, though, very briefly, is this. I believe that the effects of this bioweapon will be felt for generations. And I believe that we're at the start of it. And real implications of what they've unleashed on humanity is yet to be really dealt with. Would you agree with me there?
I didn't hear. She was breaking off.
She was breaking off.
Okay. Let me try to repeat it and try to correct me if I'm wrong here. You stated that this bioweapon is something that people haven't been able to wrap their head around. And the effects of this bioweapon is going to affect generations to come, and that we are just getting started, but people don't realize how this is going to impact future generations from these injections. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. You see, that's the reason why we don't want you giving us something that will tamper with our DNA. The U.S. Army Medical Research Institute in Fort Detrick said in 2019, March 8, in a publication by two of its staff, um, that if there was ever a coronavirus pandemic so prescient that medical countermeasures, in other words, whatever we want to use to treat this virus when it shows up, should not be immunological. It should be a tablet, something that we can take to stop. But now they've given us a jab that affects the ovaries, the brain, the liver, the nerves, the heart, the prostate. It affects virtually every organ in the body. Now, if there was ever a butterfly effect that needs to be measured, this is the butterfly effect. You know, if a man who is supposed to have children and one of the children becomes an inventor of a green energy source that's amazing, nobody even could imagine, you kill that man's daughter or the ovaries. A lot of things are dying because of this jab, dying directly or being scarred through inflammation, fatigue, disability, confusion, brain fog, and what have you. The consequences of turning a group of normal people or even normal chronically baseline ill people who can function at the highest capacity without the introduction of the virus or the vaccine, which in my opinion are both bioweapons. The impact of just that virus or vaccine, for example, take me for example, during this pandemic, when a 75-year-old unvaccinated patient comes into an emergency room in the majority of hospitals or emergency rooms around the country, and they come in with COVID. The doctor just says, "Well, go on home and all that. Are you jabbed?" And say, "Oh, you're not vaccinated." And say, "Oh, that's why you get COVID." Sometimes all they need is Pepsid, but that person who gets Pepsid and Zyrtec over the counter for $20, or even maybe Medicare pays for all of it, they go home and they're fine. They die suddenly. Their children didn't expect Papa to die. The grandchildren know Papa is still walking on his lawnmowers, harvesting hay, and it dies suddenly. The trauma that that can lead to is a catastrophic vicious cycle in terms of the negative and absolutely insane impact just on one person's death. Now imagine millions. You're absolutely correct, Firebird. But we have not, like you said. And I think from what you've shared with me, you've inspired me to go and start looking for the right words. Job 6:25 says, "How forcible are right words." Spike protein, whoever was responsible for the development of the spike protein bioweapon, whether in the form of the virus or in the form of the jab, they and all their cohorts need to be held accountable. I mean, Hitler was gone, he's gone, the Holocaust Museum is there, thank God. But this is worse than the Holocaust. And we've not yet seen the impact because some of these people are going to die, and we're going to say, oh, maybe they just had a heart attack and they died of myocarditis as a result of the vaccine. So the deaths and the impact that we already have now is horrible. But because, for example, in Britain, I hear either Moderna or Pfizer is coming. Moderna, I think, is coming to build a factory there. I'm not inciting violence, but what kind of dumbness or dullness has taken over the British people? I'm British by birth, by the way. I was born in St. Mary's, Paddington. So what kind of dullness has taken over UK that and I can understand because the commissioner of police recently said they're going to attack and arrest anybody that for freedom of speech in London. They've already given over to the Antichrist. So yes, I absolutely agree with you. The impact is intergenerational, not just from the perspective of adults who don't make it to see their grandkids and nurture those grandkids, but from the fact that even young 13, 12, 11-year-old girls and boys are getting some bioweapon injected that's going to produce spike proteins in their testicles and their ovaries. And somebody is still saying this is safe and effective. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, I guess that's why they wanted to hide the data for what was it, 50 or 75 years. They were
Yes.
trying to hide the data from that
Yes.
information because no one would be around at that time to point out the crimes that they committed. So, yes, Fire, you definitely on it. The impact of the generations, or let's say the lack of generations, from what is to occur from these jabs. I mean, yeah, it's much bigger than anything I believe we've seen in history. I mean, we are literally living in historical times right now. Um, and we do have a question for Butternut. Go ahead, try to ask your question, and then if he can't hear you, I will repeat it. Go ahead. I'm gonna turn my volume up.
Okay, I see that Justin. Okay, real quick, is there a way to detox from these jabs?
Well,
did you hear Dr. Caxton?
I did.
She said, "Is there a way to detox from the jab?"
There are ways. There are ways. I don't treat the patients. I wish I did. The reason being, it'd be so much easier for me to shut up to tell anybody who has a controversy with me, if I did treat those patients, to say, please shut up, okay? Tylenol works for fever. Do you have any randomized controlled trials for Tylenol working for fever? No, you don't need it. So, yes, there are ways to detox. You just have to find the doctors. Ivermectin has been reported to be able to bind spike protein, but and there are a few other things. For example, long COVID, the effects of the virus after infection, some of the underlying continuous inflammation as a result of exposure to different aspects of both virus and vaccine has been shown to respond 10 times better than a placebo in about 41% of patients. And that drug is called metformin. The diabetic anti-diabetes drug. Metformin has been shown in one study. And so there are a few things that you can find out. A doctor who knows how to treat long COVID and all the problems associated with it, or who will work with you and see what works. And the reason for that is, see, I'm at the early phase of COVID treatment, right? The one the government says does not work. When I see, in fact, the last three people that I treated, and I've treated a few after that, but these people were so strange in that three of them came to the emergency room. One was almost 60 years old, and he brought two parents. One was 85 or 86, and the other one was 80. The mother was younger, the father was older. And they were octogenarians coming in, a little upper respiratory infection, a little tired, and they were positive for COVID. And I treated them. I treated them with hydroxychloroquine, Zithromax, and zinc without any fear. I treated them so many times. So that's why I said, someone can say, well, there are no randomized controlled trials. I don't need that. All I need is, I see a patient comes in sick. I already know the mechanism of action of what I'm given. I know how it's supposed to work in the body, and I give it and it works. Randomized control trials are rigged control trials. So I don't need that. And we now know Big Pharma, why they rig so they can make money and lie and deceive, and it's a form of medical fraud. So you need to find somebody who has done so much with patients. For example, even though I treated father and mother with hydroxychloroquine, Zithromax, and zinc, I gave them different doses. Then I gave the son a different drug set entirely. I didn't even give him hydroxychloroquine. I give him Pepsi and Zyrtec. And they have not been bad. They're fine. So you need to find somebody who's versed and comfortable with their understanding of the disease, such that they can even explain to you. You may have something on your shelf. What I'm saying now, that if you have Pepsi and Zyrtec, right? Let's say you get on a plane and you're exposed to people with COVID, right? What do? I know what you can do. You can take super concentrated warm salt solution. How do you get a super concentrated solution? Take some warm water, a little bit in a glass, a little bit, or in a cup, just this much. Start pouring salt into it and stir it. When you add a little more salt and it doesn't dissolve, right there you have a super concentrated salt solution. If you got on a bus, a train, a plane, a party, someone's house, a Walmart, and you heard the person you came in contact with had COVID, within the 3 hour period, that's a lot of time, right? Within 3 hours of that exposure, if you do what I'm about to tell you, I have soldiers, veterans try this, and they say it's insane. I know it works because it's basic biology. That super concentrated salt solution that you just made. Remember, I said I deal with the acute phase, the early phase, not the late phase. Maybe a year or two from now, I had done enough work to set up a clinic where I can take care of the chronic phase. But now I'm still in the hospital. If you take some of that salt solution and drop about 8 drops in each nostril, and then gargle with the rest of the water as much as you can. Put it back of your throat and gargle with it. You've destroyed the RNA and a lot of other DNA viruses that you may not be aware of. You've already inhaled that can cause upper respiratory symptoms. Gargle. Don't do anything. Don't rinse anything off. Wait about 5 minutes. You will have destroyed virtually whatever COVID exposure you had. There are things in COVID that are called effective but not proven. But if it's going to work for you, and it may not work for the next person, as far as the doctor is concerned, whatever works for his patient, that's all that matters. And you can try that. You go to your grandmother, you go to your uncle or your cousin or your niece, and you find out that they had COVID the next day, they called you. You don't panic. You do exactly what I described. And there's so many other things that are helpful. Like Vicks Vapor Rub is helpful. Eucalyptus, menthol, and camphor. Those things deactivate the virus. They deactivate the RNA and the DNA in the virus. So, having said that, to your question, find someone who understands and spends a lot of time in that area. And they will make your life so much easy. And if one thing doesn't work, they'll know what next to make it. If you look at my PTR on Clubhouse, for example, you'll see a lot of things that I listed there. It's because I've tried a lot of them. And in my book, I've tried a lot of the things there. And there's a lot of information and research information. But right now, long COVID, ivermectin, metformin has been shown to be decent in terms of response. But I can't give you what I want to do. What I do as an expert is to be able to give you at least 3-4 layers of alternatives to go ahead and try A, B, or at least C, and you'll get your result. Hope that helps.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Caxton. I mean, I definitely believe it's important that, there's no one size fits all remedy, and everyone would need to be treated individually. But another thing I just want to point out, there is a difference between detoxing, from heavy metals and things of that nature, then what can you do about, your DNA that has been, you know, contaminated or changed. So that is the reason why I, always, for me, and this is my perspective, I don't push anything on anybody, but that is something that you're gonna have to work out with the Most High, and let Him know, because at the end of the day, God has the final say in anything that happens in your body. So regardless of what you think you can do, and there's certain things you can do personally, but spiritually, you would need to build that connection so that He can do what He needs to do for your body, because He created it. He's the one that can, change and heal and do magical things that, the average person will not be able to do. So, but thank you so for that response, Dr. Caxton. I don't see any other questions. So I wanted to say, and at least give you some time back so your wife can enjoy you while you're home and everything. But do you have any final last words that you want to share? Any final comments that you want to put out there for the listeners? And we look forward to your next show as well, regardless if it's on COVID or, building a healthy marriage. We're definitely going to support you. So I'll be looking out for that show to be created, and I'll make sure that I RSVP. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming in today. This has been an awesome interview with Dr. Caxton. He has exposed some different things regarding medical fraud, talked about his censorship, shared some great information as it relates to patents and different books, so that anyone listening can have something to start with to continue their research or get started on their research. Because I know a lot of people say, well, what do you mean by do your own research? Do your own research. Well, he just gave you a good quite a few good nuggets to get anyone started on any type of research. So, and I want to throw out a few key words for anyone that does want to research this, what we're discussing today, which is these mRNA bioweapons. You can look up the term nanotechnology, the Internet of Bodies, graphene oxide, different things that you can really get to understand, quantum dots. And I'll do another show going over some of these key terms and other things as it relates to this conversation. But again, I just want to thank Dr. Caxton for taking the time out. And this is actually one of my first rooms here on Chatter where I'm doing an interview and really trying to utilize the features that Chatter is offering right now with the Chatter Studio, as well as I'm streaming into Restream so that it can go out to multiple platforms. And as you know, guys, according to Nelson, the Chatter Studio will have those features where you can add on a Rumble, add on a YouTube. And that's what I'm doing through Restream because the features are not enabled yet. So I do look forward to that. And again, I want to throw it back over to Dr. Caxton. Do you have any final comments? We got some more people coming into the room. So, yeah, is there anything else that you want to share that we might didn't get a chance to touch on? I'm just going to give you that opportunity to wrap everything that we discussed up as we move forward. Yeah,
Well,
thank
I
you.
just wanted to say that, a lot of what we've shared today, the best part of the internet is that you can validate, you can do your own homework, and it's not a lot. But even more importantly, every one of us has only a limited time on earth. You will be wise to know God, not the way you feel He has to be known. You can do what scientists do, experiment and try to find God in so many places. But make sure that before you take your last breath, God has some piece of real estate and it can decide what criteria He requires from you in order for you to enter into that property. For those who own property, you know what it's like. Whoever you don't want around your house cannot come around your house. It's the same with God. He loves everybody. He set up criteria, follow His criteria, find out what they are, and don't fool yourself that there is no God. Because no matter what we face on earth, censorship, attack, poverty, bankruptcy, disease, pain, it's nothing compared to the two options that occur when we take our last breath, to heaven or to hell. It's our choice. So I'll say one more time, find God, get intimately close to Him so He can shield you from this deluge of demonic, bioweaponized madness, and have your head in the game of life. Don't bury your head in religion. Have your head in the game of life. Wake up. Thank you.
Well, that was awesome, Dr. Caxton. This has been an amazing interview. Some great information that was shared. So I am going to stop streaming live on the Restream. Dr. Caxton, you are more than welcome to come over to Chatter if you want to. But I will be, wrapping it up and allow people to make final comments. And I do have a few other things that I'm going to share. But as far as the interview is concerned, I just want to thank you again, and yeah, just stay in touch, and we want to continue to support you in
Thank
anything
you.
that you're doing today. So thank you so much, and I am going to stop the screen share. So But yeah, you're more than welcome to come on in. And guys, we're going to start going into final comments. So if you do have any final comments, feel free to come off mic. And this is what we're going to be doing today. So um, as I wind down into this final conversation, uh, um, but let me just drop off the mic and do my little finals and make sure everything is set up in the back channel. So Fireburst, I'm gonna throw it over to you. Anybody else that wants to talk, feel free to come off mic. I want to welcome Sassy to the room, Tim, River, Mike, Senna, and Tess. Much love to you guys. I see we got Frida down in the audience and Folu. Feel free to come on up if you want to. I do plan on sharing a few more before I close this room. So if you want to see the video, you will have to come to the stage. But I'm going to mic up. Feel free to jump right on in, guys, while I make sure everything else is disconnected on the back end. Okay.
Okay, while it's getting that, I'd like to thank everyone for coming and for your patience as well. It has been a little bit glitchy. We do have an issue with Android at the moment. We're not able to.
Thank you, Dr. Caxton.
But hopefully, with the next week,
How do I exit?
find out. I personally